What does stillness teach when words are no longer enough? Story 1. The Listener Under the Cedar. In the village of Yulin, where the roofs were low and the cedar trees leaned over the road like old teachers, there lived a young tea seller named Ren. Each morning he opened his small stall before sunrise, swept the wooden step, warmed a pot of water, and arranged his cups in a careful row. Travelers liked his tea because it was clean and fragrant, but they came back because Ren remembered their worries. He remembered who had a sick mother who was saving coins for a wedding, who had quarreled with a brother and pretended not to care. People told him everything. Ren listened with his head slightly bowed, nodding at the right moments, pouring tea when their hands became restless. Yet when the stall closed and the road emptied, his own thoughts grew louder than any customer had ever been. He would sit beside the dying coals and ask himself the same questions until his chest felt tight. Why had his father left before teaching him enough? Why did his mother look so small when she slept? Why did kindness not protect a person from loss? One rainy evening, a cart driver stopped at the stall and spoke of a monk who lived beyond the cedar ridge. The monk was not famous for miracles, nor for fierce debates, nor for answering every question. He was known because people arrived, troubled, and left quieter. The driver claimed that the monk had once listened to a widow for 3 days without offering a single instruction, and by the 4th morning, she bowed with gratitude, as if he had given her a jewel. Ren laughed softly when he heard this. A teacher who said nothing sounded like an empty well. Still, the story followed him home. All night the rain tapped on his window, and his mind kept asking whether silence could really hold more wisdom than speech. Before dawn, while the village dogs still slept in doorways, Ren wrapped a cloth around a packet of roasted barley, left a note for his mother, and began walking toward the cedar ridge with a heart full of questions he had polished for years. The path rose slowly through terraces of wet grass and small stones shining under mist. Ren expected a gate, a bell, perhaps an old disciple who would ask his purpose. Instead, he found a clearing beneath a huge cedar tree and a thin monk mending a broken sandal with a needle made from bone. The monk looked neither surprised nor welcoming, as if visitors belonged to the morning in the same way birdsong did. Ren bowed and introduced himself. Then, fearing he might lose courage, he began to speak. His questions tumbled out quickly. He asked why people suffer even when they try to do good, why memories can hurt more at night, why the mind clings to what is already gone, and whether peace means forgetting or forgiving. The monk tied a knot in the sandal strap, placed it beside him, and looked toward the branches above. Ren waited for an answer. A drop of rain fell from a cedar needle into the soil. Another followed. The monk only listened. At first, Ren felt respected. No one in the village had ever let him speak for so long without interrupting. After a while, the silence became uncomfortable. His own voice began to sound too sharp among the trees, and he noticed how often he repeated himself in different words. He spoke of his father as if the leaving had happened yesterday, though 6 winters had passed. He spoke of fear as if naming it many times might make it smaller. He explained his goodness, his loneliness, his confusion, and the ache of being useful to everyone but restful to no one. The monk's face remained gentle, not empty, not distant. It was the face of a pond receiving rain. When Ren finally stopped, his throat felt dry. The monk poured him tea from a blackened kettle and pushed the cup toward him. Steam rose between them. Ren held the warmth and waited. At last the monk said, "You have brought a full basket. Shall we look at what is inside, or shall we keep counting the basket's handle?" The question irritated Ren because it was not an answer. He had climbed in the rain, confessed private pain, and received a sentence about a basket. The monk seemed to notice the disappointment without being wounded by it. He stood, lifted a fallen cedar cone, and placed it in Ren's palm. "Tell me what this is," he said. Ren turned it over. A cone from the tree. The monk nodded. "Now tell me what it has heard." Ren frowned, thinking the old man might be testing him with nonsense. A cedar cone did not hear, yet the clearing was so quiet that he became aware of faint sounds he had ignored. Water traveling under roots, a crow shaking rain from its wings, his own breath moving unevenly. The monk did not press him. After several moments, Ren answered, "It has heard the rain." The monk smiled. "And did the rain ask the cedar to explain itself before it fell?" Ren stayed in the clearing that day because the rain grew heavy and the path down became a ribbon of mud. The monk gave him a dry robe and set him to work carrying split wood under a roof of woven reeds. During work, the monk spoke little. He showed where the wood should be stacked, pointed to a bucket that needed filling, and tapped the rim of an empty bowl when it was time to eat. Ren found the quiet almost rude, then almost peaceful, then difficult again. His mind wanted teachings in clean sentences. Instead, it received the sound of water, the smell of wet bark, the ache in his shoulders, and the sight of the monk washing bowls with complete attention. By evening, Ren understood one thing he had not expected. His mind did not grow loud because the world was noisy. It grew loud because it kept demanding a verdict on everything it touched. Every memory had to mean something. Every sadness needed a reason. Every silence became an accusation unless someone filled it. That night, the monk prepared a place for Ren on a reed mat beneath eaves. Mist moved through the trees, and the cedar above the clearing creaked softly in the wind. Ren lay awake, listening to the forest breathe. He tried to meditate because he thought a spiritual place required a spiritual performance. Immediately his mind began asking whether he was doing it correctly, whether the monk was secretly judging him, whether peace would come before morning. The more he chased calm, the farther it moved. Near midnight he sat up, frustrated, and saw the monk seated at the edge of the clearing, facing the dark slope. The old man was not stiff or dramatic. His shoulders rose and fell like any tired body. Ren approached quietly and whispered that he could not stop thinking. The monk did not turn around. "Then, do not stop," he said. "Listen to thinking as you would listen to rain on a roof. Rain does not become a flood because you hear it." The sentence loosened something in Ren. He returned to the mat, but instead of arguing with each thought, he listened. A memory appeared. His father standing in the doorway with a travel bag. Ren felt the old anger come forward, ready to defend itself. He listened to the anger without calling it wise or foolish. Beneath it was fear. Beneath fear was a child's hope that someone might turn back. The layers did not vanish, but they no longer had to shout. Another thought came, his mother coughing in sleep. He listened and found love inside, worry, tenderness inside exhaustion. The forest continued its small work around him. A beetle crossed the wooden post. Somewhere beyond the clearing, water found a new path through stones. Ren slept before he realized sleep had arrived, not like a prize won by effort, but like a guest who entered when the room stopped arguing. Morning opened pale and clean. The monk was already awake, grinding leaves for medicine. Ren felt embarrassed by how much peace a few hours of simple listening had given him. He wanted to ask for a formal practice, a rule he could bring home, something he could trust. When the village noise returned, the monk handed him a broom and asked him to sweep the clearing. Fallen needles lay everywhere, thin and brown, impossible to gather perfectly. Ren swept them into small piles, and the wind scattered the edges. He swept again. The wind moved again. A familiar impatience rose in him. The monk watched from the steps and said, "A mind that wants no needles under the cedar will never rest under a cedar." Ren stopped sweeping. He saw how often he had treated life like a floor that must remain clean after one effort. He had mistaken peace for a condition that should stay arranged. Before Ren left, the monk walked with him to the edge of the ridge. The village could be seen far below, its roofs dark after rain, its smoke lifting in thin lines. Ren felt the old life waiting for him. Customers, debts, his mother's medicine, the cup with a crack he kept meaning to replace. He asked the monk how to remember the teaching when people came with their sorrows and when his own questions returned. The monk picked up a small stone and dropped it into a puddle. Rings moved outward until they met the grass and disappeared. When someone speaks, do not hurry to become the answer, he said. When your own heart speaks, do not hurry to become its judge. Listening is not weakness. It is how wisdom finds the door. Ren bowed low. The monk raised a hand in farewell, then turned back toward the cedar, as if returning to a friend. The first day's home tested Ren immediately. A woman arrived angry about a neighbor's goat. Two brothers argued beside his stall until their tea grew cold. His mother complained that he had gone to the ridge without enough food. Ren felt answers rising in him, quick and clever, the way they always had. He wanted to repair everyone's life by lunchtime. Instead, he practiced placing both feet on the ground before speaking. He listened for the feeling beneath the words. The woman with the goat was not angry about the goat alone. She was tired of being ignored. The brothers were not fighting about coins alone. Each feared the other no longer trusted him. His mother was not complaining about food alone. She had been afraid of waking to an empty house. Ren did not become perfect. Sometimes he interrupted. Sometimes irritation slipped out. Yet he began to notice that people softened when he stopped trying to be impressive. Weeks passed, and the tea stall changed without changing. The same cups lined the shelf. The same travelers stepped out of dust and weather. A new habit entered quietly. Before serving the first cup, Ren listened for one sound he had not made. a wheel on the road, a sparrow under the roof, the kettle's low murmur. This small act reminded him that he did not carry the whole world by himself. Customers began to linger differently. They said the tea tasted deeper, though Ren used the same leaves. They said the stall felt peaceful, though the street remained crowded. One evening a child asked why the old cedar cone sat beside the coin box. Ren looked at the cone, dry now, its scales opened by warmth. "It teaches me not to answer the rain," he said. The child considered this, nodded as if it made perfect sense, and went back to chasing a beetle along the step. Years later, when Ren's mother had died gently after a long illness, and the tea stall had passed into the hands of his niece, he returned to the cedar ridge. The path seemed shorter, or perhaps grief had made him less dramatic. The clearing remained, though the reed roof had sagged and the woodpile was gone. The monk was older, his back bent like a branch under snow. He recognized Ren and smiled without surprise. They sat beneath the cedar while afternoon light moved slowly across the ground. Ren thanked him for teaching him to listen. The monk shook his head. "I only stopped blocking the lesson," he said. Ren laughed, and the sound startled birds from a lower branch. For a while, they said nothing. The silence was not empty. It held rain remembered, tea poured, words forgiven, and all the questions that had grown tired enough to rest. During the second month after his return, Ren discovered that listening did not always feel peaceful. A grain merchant came to the stall and spent an entire morning complaining about taxes, weather, lazy sons, dishonest scales, and the poor quality of road repairs. Ren listened at first with sincere patience, then with stiffness disguised as patience, then with an inward wish that the merchant would choke politely on sesame cake. The old habit of judgment returned, wearing the robe of spiritual discipline. He told himself that he was listening, but beneath his calm face, he was composing little punishments for the man. When the merchant finally left, Ren felt worse than before. He looked at the cedar cone by the coin box and almost resented it. That evening he understood that listening was not the same as letting another person's noise invade every room of the heart. The monk had not taught him to become a wall with no gate. He had taught him to hear clearly enough to know what could enter and what could pass along the road. Ren began practicing a quieter boundary. When a customer's sorrow was real, he made space for it. When someone's anger was looking only for a place to spill, he offered tea, but did not drink the anger himself. This took time. At first, he felt cruel whenever he did not absorb another person's trouble. Later, he noticed that people were helped more by his steadiness than by his exhaustion. His mother, watching from the doorway, said one afternoon that he had stopped coming home with everyone else's weather on his face. Ren smiled, because the phrase was exact. For years he had believed compassion meant carrying every cloud that passed over the village. Now he saw that the cedar did not become the rain. It received rain, released rain, and remained rooted. This was not indifference. It was the strength that allowed tenderness to continue without turning bitter. One autumn morning, a letter arrived from a town beyond the river. Ren recognized his father's handwriting before he opened it. The characters leaned sharply to the right, as if always leaving. His hands became cold. For a long time he placed the letter beside the kettle and served customers without reading it. Each cup poured felt like a delay borrowed from ordinary life. When the stall finally emptied, his mother sat across from him, folded her hands, and said nothing. Ren broke the seal. The letter was short. His father was ill. He had no explanation large enough for the years. He asked whether Ren would come, if his heart allowed. No apology appeared until the final line, and even there, it was clumsy. Ren waited for anger to rise with its old fire. It came, but not alone. Pity came beside it. Curiosity followed. Grief stood behind them all, older and quieter than the rest. The journey to his father's town took 2 days. Ren did not go because he had forgiven everything. He went because listening had made him unwilling to let an old story speak for a living moment. His father lay on a narrow bed in a rented room above a dye shop. He looked smaller than memory and less powerful than absence had made him. For several minutes neither man spoke. The street below carried the sound of wheels and vendors, ordinary sounds moving through an extraordinary silence. Ren's father began with excuses, then stopped. His breath rattled. "I was ashamed," he said at last. "I thought leaving would make my failure disappear from your eyes." Ren listened. The words did not repair childhood. They did not rebuild birthdays or remove nights his mother had cried quietly. Yet they allowed the truth to become less monstrous. A suffering man had made a cowardly choice. That was terrible enough. It no longer needed to become a myth. When Ren returned home after the funeral, he expected peace to arrive in a clean wave. Instead, he felt uneven for weeks. Some days he was relieved. Some days anger returned. Offended by its own softening, the cedar cone remained beside the coin box, open and dry. Ren touched it whenever he wanted healing to behave more neatly. He remembered the monk's words about the basket. A life did not become lighter because every item inside it was made beautiful. It became lighter when a person stopped pretending not to carry what was there. Ren spoke with his mother often during that season. They remembered without forcing sweetness. They admitted what had hurt. They laughed at small absurdities from hard years. Slowly, the father's leaving became one sound among many in the bell of their family, not the only note allowed to ring. Ren's niece, Leanne, became his most honest teacher. She was 12 when she began helping at the stall, all elbows, questions, and impatient kindness. She wanted to learn the art of listening because customers treated Ren like a trusted bridge. On her first day, she leaned toward every person with such intensity that people became nervous. Ren laughed and told her listening did not require chasing someone's words with your whole face. The next day, she tried calmness so completely that she looked asleep. Gradually, she discovered the middle way. She learned to pour tea without clatter when grief entered, to let laughter finish before adding her own, and to notice when silence needed a full cup more than advice. Watching her, Ren saw how any teaching becomes alive only when another person misunderstands it, wrestles with it, and finds a shape that fits their own hands. A winter festival brought the largest crowd the stall had ever served. Musicians played near the well, children carried paper fish, and merchants shouted prices with ceremonial cheer. Leanne spilled a tray. A drunk man sang into Ren's ear, and a woman accused him of favoring another customer. The old Ren would have tightened around every irritation and called it responsibility. That day, he paused whenever he could, finding the smallest sound beneath the crowd, the kettle lid, a girl's quiet apology, snow sliding from a roof. Listening did not make the day easy. It made the day whole. When darkness settled, he and Leanne sat on overturned crates, too tired to speak. The cedar cone rested between them on the counter. Leanne touched it and asked if wisdom always looks so ordinary. Ren answered that ordinary things survive because they do not need to impress anyone. Near the end of Ren's life, people began calling him the listener of Yulon, a title that embarrassed him because it sounded finished. He knew how often he failed. He still disliked certain voices. He still prepared clever responses in his mind. He still woke some nights with questions circling like moths near a flame. The difference was that he no longer mistook the circling for disaster. He would sit up, drink water, and listen until the thoughts became less like enemies and more like travelers at a late hour. Some stayed briefly. Some needed a corner by the fire. Some left before dawn. The practice had never been to own silence. It was to become hospitable without surrendering the house. In this way, his final years were not free of sorrow, but sorrow had learned to remove its shoes before entering. One evening, Leanne asked whether listening could change the past. Ren answered no, and then changed his mind. It could not alter the fact of what happened, but it could change the room where the past was kept. A memory stored in a locked room grows stale and frightening. A memory brought into air becomes part of life again. He told her that his father had not become a good father because Ren listened. His mother had not been spared sorrow, yet the old story had stopped commanding every new day. Leanne considered this and said it sounded like opening a window in a house no one wanted to enter. Ren thought of the cedar ridge, rain on needles, the monk's quiet face, and agreed. On nights when sleep came slowly, Ren no longer scolded himself for wakefulness. He listened to the village settling. Shutters tapped. A baby fussed. Dogs answered one another across alleys, then lost interest. The world was not silent, but it was not demanding him either. He would place one hand on his chest and let the breath arrive without counting it. Some thoughts still asked for explanations. He did not always give them one. This became a gentle freedom. Not every question needed to be fed before morning. Some could lie down at the foot of the bed like tired animals and sleep beside him. When night came, Ren slept again beneath the eaves. Older now, with fewer demands on the dark, he dreamed of the village road after rain. Every footprint filled with sky. Every cup at his stall held not tea, but still water. His father walked past without a bag, not returning, not leaving, simply passing like any other figure in a dream. Ren did not call out. He listened to the sound of footsteps fading, and for the first time, the fading did not feel like abandonment. It felt like distance becoming honest. Near dawn, he woke to cedar needles falling one by one on the roof. The old monk was breathing softly nearby. Ren closed his eyes again and let the sound teach without words. Wisdom, he understood, was not the end of questions. It was the moment a person stopped using questions to escape what was already here. Story 2. the lamp that burned without asking. Far from Yulon, beyond rice plains and blue hills, a stone bridge crossed a narrow gorge where travelers often stopped to rest. Beside the bridge stood a small shrine with a bronze lamp hanging from its roof beam. The lamp was cared for by a woman named Mira, who had inherited the duty from an aunt no one remembered without smiling. Mira cleaned the lamp each morning, trimmed the wick, swept ash from the threshold, and placed fresh water in a clay bowl beneath the image of the Buddha. The shrine was not grand. Its roof leaked during storms. Ants marched along the back wall, and the path to it was sometimes hidden by grass. Yet old farmers touched the doorpost before crossing the bridge. Mothers brought children to bow before long journeys, and tired merchants left bruised fruit on the step as offerings. Mira liked the work because it was simple. She trusted simple things: a clean bowl, a straight wick, a flame that did not argue. Her peace began to tremble when a wealthy patron from the provincial city arrived with a procession of servants. He wore a robe with silver thread and carried the scent of sandalwood wherever he moved. After bowing politely, he praised the shrine's location and criticized nearly everything else. The stones were uneven. The bell was too small. The lamp, though old, lacked elegance. He offered to rebuild the shrine in polished wood, add painted guardians, and hang a new lamp shaped like a lotus with 7 branches. The village headman was delighted. Travelers would notice. Donations might increase. Mira bowed because everyone expected gratitude. But something in her chest tightened. She had cared for the bronze lamp since she was 16. Its handle was worn smooth by the hands of people who had asked nothing from history except safe passage. The new lamp would shine brighter, yet she feared it would not know the bridge. During the weeks of rebuilding, the old shrine was taken apart piece by piece. Mira wrapped the bronze lamp in cloth and kept it in her room. Each night she sat beside it after work, touching the dents on its rim. She knew attachment when she saw it in others. She had advised widows to release old shoes and farmers to stop blaming dead fathers for bad soil. Now attachment sat in front of her in the shape of metal, and she did not know how to bow to it. The village praised the patron's generosity. Children watched carpenters carve dragons into beams. Even the headman told Mira she should be proud. Instead, she felt replaced. Her duty had once been a quiet conversation with flame and dust. Now it seemed part of a performance staged for people who crossed the bridge quickly and admired things loudly. The new shrine opened on the first clear day after the rains. Lanterns were hung from bamboo poles. Musicians played flutes near the bridge. The patron gave a speech about preserving ancient wisdom, though he had never visited before that season. At sunset, Mira was asked to light the new 7-branched lamp. Everyone watched. Her hand shook as she touched flame to wick after wick until the polished lotus glowed with golden points. The crowd sighed with pleasure. It was beautiful. She could not deny it. Light trembled over painted beams and the Buddha's face. Yet the brightness felt strangely thin to her, like a song sung by someone with a perfect voice and no memory of grief. After the ceremony ended, Mira remained alone. She listened to the new lamp hiss softly. From beneath its shine, she heard the bridge stones cooling in the dark and the gorge water moving unseen below. A week later, A traveling nun arrived at dusk. Her robe was faded from sun, and her sandals were tied with mismatched cords. She bowed before the shrine, then sat on the step as if her body had been waiting all day for permission to stop. Mira brought tea. The nun thanked her and looked at the new lamp for a long time. "It is bright," she said. Mira heard herself answer too quickly. "It is not the old one." The nun did not ask what she meant. That made Mira want to explain. She spoke of the patron, the rebuilding, the bronze lamp wrapped in cloth, and the unease of watching a duty become decoration. The nun drank tea without interruption. When Mira finished, the nun pointed to a moth circling the 7 flames. "That little one does not know old from new," she said. "It only knows where warmth appears." Mira disliked the nun for nearly a full minute. The answer sounded too easy. Of course a moth did not know history. That was why moths burned themselves. The nun seemed amused by her silence, but did not smile unkindly. She asked where the old lamp was. Mira brought it from her room, unwrapped it, and placed it on the step. In the open air, the bronze looked humble and tired. Soot darkened its inner cup. One side leaned slightly from an accident years before when a boy had struck it with a pole. The nun lifted it with both hands. "A lamp does not keep its holiness by refusing another lamp," she said. "It keeps holiness by having held light when light was needed." Mira looked away toward the gorge. The water below was invisible, yet its sound filled the space between them. Something in the sentence found an opening, but pride closed it quickly. The nun stayed 3 nights because her ankle had swollen on the road. During the day, she helped Mira sweep the shrine and remove fallen leaves from the bridge. She was slow, sometimes clumsy, and had a habit of asking practical questions that revealed hidden teachings. Why sweep the step if dust returns? Why fill the bowl if water evaporates? Why light a lamp if dawn will come without it? Mira answered at first with rules she had learned from her aunt. Then she began to hear the emptiness in repeating rules without touching their center. On the 3rd evening, a storm rose suddenly from the west. Wind bent the bamboo poles and drove rain across the bridge. The new lamp flickered wildly. One branch went out, then another. Mira rushed to shield it, but the roof leaked above the beam. Water struck the polished lotus and sent smoke into the air. Within moments, all 7 flames were gone. The village was asleep beyond the rain, and no patron stood nearby to admire or complain. Mira felt panic, then embarrassment at her panic. It was only a lamp, yet the darkness inside the shrine seemed to accuse her. The nun, leaning on a walking stick, entered with the old bronze lamp in her hands. She had found it where Mira had left it, near the storage shelf. Without ceremony, she placed it on the floor, poured a little oil, set a wick, and lit it from the coal she carried in a covered cup. A small flame rose, no brighter than a child's fingernail. The shrine changed. Painted beams disappeared into shadow. The Buddha's face softened. Rain beat on the roof, but the little flame held steady because it stood low, protected by stone. Mira watched it and felt tears come for reasons she could not name. The old lamp had not defeated the new one. It had simply served when called. After the storm, the patron's craftsman returned to repair the lotus lamp. He apologized for the leak and promised improvements. Mira listened politely. No anger remained, which surprised her. She suggested that the old bronze lamp be kept at floor level near the water bowl for storm nights and for travelers who wished to sit close. The craftsman agreed because it sounded practical. The headman agreed because the old lamp gave the shrine a sense of tradition. The patron later sent a letter praising the combination of old and new, as if the idea had been planned. Mira smiled when she read it. Some lessons did not require credit. From then on, the 7-branched lamp was lit during festivals and clear evenings, while the bronze lamp burned quietly at dawn, in rain, and whenever someone arrived with a face too tired for brightness. The change altered Mira's way of seeing. She no longer divided the world so quickly into sincere and false, humble and proud, old and new. A bright lamp could comfort a child afraid of shadows. A dented lamp could steady a widow who did not want anyone to look directly at her grief. A renovated shrine could draw travelers who might otherwise pass without bowing. A cracked step could remind them to slow down. The world, she discovered, did not become impure simply because more than one intention lived inside it. Her own heart held mixed intentions every day. She wanted to serve and also be seen serving. She wanted simplicity and also feared being forgotten. Once she admitted this, the shrine felt less like something she had to defend and more like something she was learning beside. Months later, a young soldier crossed the bridge at night. His unit had marched ahead, but he had fallen behind because of fever. Mira found him sitting on the step, staring at the bronze lamp. He said he had not bowed in years and did not know what words to use. Mira told him no words were required. He laughed bitterly and said silence made him hear too much. She sat beside him, close enough to share the lamp's small circle of warmth, far enough not to trap him. After a long time, he spoke of fear, of a friend lost on a mountain road, of the shame of wanting to go home. Mira felt old habits rising. Advice, comfort, phrases polished by use. She let them pass. The bronze flame moved once in a draft, then steadied. The soldier's breathing slowed. Before leaving at dawn, he bowed not to the lamp alone, but to the space that had not rushed him. Mira understood then why her aunt had loved the shrine. It was never about keeping a building perfect. It was about tending a place where people could arrive without needing to be impressive. The lamps were only helpers. The bridge, too, was a teacher. It did not ask whether the foot crossing it belonged to a saint, a thief, a mother, a scholar, or a frightened soldier. It held what came and allowed it to pass. Each evening, Mira watched travelers move from one side of the gorge to the other. Some paused, some did not. The lamps burned either way. Their work was not to demand gratitude from the dark, but to offer enough light for the next step. This became Mira's practice, and slowly it became her sleep as well. At night, she no longer lay awake, guarding the past from change. She let old and new sit together inside her, both warmed by the same quiet flame. Many years afterward, when Mira's hair had turned white and the patron's painted beams had faded in sun, children asked why the shrine had 2 lamps. They expected a legend, perhaps a contest between spirits or a miracle during a storm. Mira told them, a simpler story. She said one lamp taught people to look up, and the other taught people to come close. One showed celebration, the other showed companionship. A child asked which lamp was wiser. Mira looked at the bridge where evening mist had begun to gather and answered, "The wise lamp is the one that burns where it is needed." The children were satisfied. After they ran home, Mira lit the bronze lamp first. Its flame rose small and steady. Then she lit the lotus lamp above, and for a little while the shrine held two kinds of light, one humble, one bright, neither asking the other to disappear. News of the two lamps spread farther than Mira expected. Pilgrims began visiting not only to bow, but to ask which lamp they should pray before. Some wanted the upper lotus lamp because its brightness felt hopeful. Others chose the bronze lamp because sadness made them shy. Mira refused to turn the difference into a rule. She told each visitor to stand quietly and notice where the body wished to go. A proud magistrate once laughed at this and declared that bodies were unreliable guides. He chose the lotus lamp, made an elaborate offering, then found himself staring at the floor lamp until tears gathered under his eyelids. Mira pretended not to notice. The next morning he returned before dawn and sat beside the bronze flame without servants, incense, or speech. When he left, he bowed to the threshold with the awkward sincerity of a man who had misplaced his armor for a little while. The nun came back the following year, thinner, but walking without a stick. Mira greeted her like someone greeting weather that had once changed the course of a river. They sat by the gorge and shared persimmons. The nun asked whether the new shrine had become easier to love. Mira thought carefully. Love was not the word she would have used before. Acceptance, perhaps. Usefulness. Peace. Yet, as she watched sunlight touch the repaired eaves and heard the bronze lamp's chain knock softly in a breeze, she realized love had arrived without announcement. It was not the possessive love she had felt for the old shrine, the kind that guarded memory like a locked room. This new love had windows. It could let strangers enter, let craftsmen improve a beam, let children laugh too loudly, let smoke stain what had once been polished. The nun nodded when Mira said this. "Good," she replied. "A shrine with no windows becomes a box for fear." Not every change was graceful. One summer, a group of young men from the city came to paint the outer wall as a gift. They chose a color too bright for the valley, a red that shouted against moss and stone. The head man praised their generosity, but villagers whispered that the shrine looked embarrassed. Mira disliked the color instantly. She almost ordered it removed. Then she remembered how easily care can hide inside poor taste. The young men had walked 3 days carrying paint. They had slept on hard ground and eaten plain rice to make their offering. Mira thanked them sincerely and waited. Rain, sun, and winter softened the red within a year. By the second year, it had become warm and weathered. Not what she would have chosen, yet not wrong. The shrine was teaching her again that beauty sometimes needs time to lose its argument with itself. A fire nearly destroyed the village during a dry season. It began in a storage shed and leapt from roof to roof before the river line stopped it. That night, the shrine became a place where people brought what they had saved: a basket of bowls, 2 blankets, a cage with 1 terrified chicken, a child's writing board, an old man's medicine pouch, Mira kept both lamps burning until dawn. No one asked whether the lotus or bronze flame was more sacred. People slept under the eaves, leaning against one another, faces blackened by smoke. The lamps did not explain why homes burn. They gave enough light for neighbors to find water, bandage hands, divide food, and see that they were not alone. Mira moved among them with a calm she did not know she possessed. Service had become less dramatic over the years. It no longer asked how it would be remembered before it acted. When the damaged houses were rebuilt, the shrine received fewer offerings for a while because people needed every coin for timber and grain. The headman worried aloud that neglect would offend unseen forces. Mira, polishing the bronze lamp, said a hungry child offended her more than an empty donation bowl. She began placing the shrine's rice offerings in a common pot after morning prayers. At first, some villagers objected, fearing disrespect. Then an old grandmother pointed out that the Buddha had never eaten the rice, while living people could. The practice remained. Travelers who left food were told where it went. Many gave more. Mira saw another layer of the teaching. A lamp does not become less holy because its light helps someone find a kitchen. A prayer does not become smaller when it turns into soup. Mira eventually took an apprentice, a quiet girl named Olin, whose parents sold herbs in the lower market. Olin loved the dramatic work, lighting the lotus lamp, ringing the bell, arranging flowers where travelers would notice them. She disliked the hidden tasks, scraping wax, cleaning soot, removing insects from the water bowl, and washing cloths that smelled of oil. Mira gave her those tasks first, not as punishment, but as initiation into the part of beauty that never appears in stories. Olin grumbled for 2 weeks. Then, one morning, she found a dead moth inside the bronze cup and cried over its fragile body. Mira helped her carry it outside and place it under mint leaves. The girl asked why creatures fly toward what can hurt them. Mira thought of patrons, pride, memory, and her younger self, guarding an old lamp against change, because warmth and danger sometimes stand close together, she said. The apprenticeship softened Mira's remaining pride. Teaching revealed how much she had forgotten about beginning. When Olin trimmed a wick too short, Mira felt impatience rise. When the girl used too much oil, judgment followed. Each mistake reminded Mira of how the nun had allowed her confusion to ripen without crushing it. She began asking questions instead of delivering corrections. What did the flame do when the wick was too long? How did smoke change the air? Which light helped a tired traveler see the step? Olin learned quickly when invited to observe. Mira learned again when forced to explain without hardening. The shrine became a classroom without benches. Weather taught. Visitors taught. Soot taught. Even the cracked stone near the entrance taught that what trips one person can train another to walk with more attention. On the anniversary of the storm that had returned the bronze lamp to service, Mira lit only that small flame. Villagers expected the lotus lamp as well, but she asked them to sit close instead. She told them no grand story, only the truth that she had once mistaken preservation for love, brightness for value, and change for theft. The children listened because adults rarely admitted being foolish in public. The old people listened because they recognized the shape of the confession. Afterward, each person placed a hand near the bronze lamp, not touching the flame, only feeling its modest heat. The shrine looked almost poor in that moment, but peace moved through it with uncommon strength. Later, when the lotus lamp was lit again, its brightness seemed kinder. It had been humbled by sharing the night. Olin eventually became skilled enough to care for the shrine when Mira traveled to visit relatives in the next province. Before leaving, Mira expected to give many instructions, but she found herself saying only 3 things. Keep the lamps clean, feed those who are hungry, and do not make your own taste into a law. Olin laughed at the last instruction, then wrote it on a scrap of paper and tucked it behind the water bowl. When Mira returned, the shrine was not exactly as she would have kept it. Flowers were arranged more wildly. The bronze lamp had been polished less, but the rice pot for travelers was fuller. Mira noticed the old urge to correct, bowed to it inwardly, and let the girl's care have its own face. The 2 lamps continued their quiet conversation year after year. Smoke darkened the ceiling above them. Rain polished the stone outside. People came with celebrations and losses, and the flames received both without changing their nature. Mira learned to sleep well during those years because she no longer believed she had to guard the shrine from becoming different. Difference would come. Dust would come. Repair would come. One only had to wake, tend the flame, offer what could be offered, and release the rest to the long patience of the night. On her final night, as caretaker, Mira dreamed she was crossing the stone bridge with no bundle in her hands. The gorge below was filled not with water, but with darkness so soft it seemed safe to fall into. On the far side, her aunt waited beside the old shrine, unchanged by time. The bronze lamp hung from its original beam, and the 7-branched lotus stood beneath it like a flower that had learned respect. Mira asked which lamp she should tend now. Her aunt laughed with the warmth Mira had missed for decades. "Child, you were never tending lamps," she said. "You were learning how to let light pass through you without calling it yours." When Mira woke, the room was still dark. Outside, rain began lightly on the roof. She did not rise at once to check the flame. For the first time, she trusted that whatever needed tending would call gently, and whatever did not call could rest. Story 3. The Farmer Who Gave the Road Back. There was once a farmer named Davi, whose field lay beside an old road between 2 villages. The road was not important enough for officials to repair, yet important enough for everyone to curse. When it flooded, Davi knew every rut in it. He knew where cartwheels sank after rain and where children liked to jump across puddles. His field grew millet, beans, and a stubborn patch of wild mint his wife loved. A low stone boundary separated his soil from the road. Davi had built that boundary with his father, stone by stone, during a summer so hot their shadows looked tired. Because of that memory, he cared for it more than anyone understood. Each time a traveler kicked a stone loose, he replaced it before sunset. Each time rain washed mud against it, he cleared the base with a hoe. The boundary was not merely property, it was proof that a life could be held in place. Davy's wife, Sarah, often teased him for speaking to the boundary as if it were a relative. He did not deny it. In a world of failing roofs, changing taxes, sick animals, and sons who might leave for the city, stones seemed honest. Put one down well, and it stayed. At least, That was what he believed, until the year of the long rain. The clouds arrived early and forgot to leave. Hillsides loosened, wells overflowed, frogs sang from places where no water had been before. One night, the river beyond the eastern grove broke its banks and sent a brown current rushing across fields and road alike. Davy woke to the sound of stones knocking against one another in the dark. By morning his boundary was gone. Some stones lay buried in silt. Others had been carried into the road. A few sat absurdly among bean plants, as if pretending they had always belonged there. Anger gave Davy energy for 3 days. He shouted at the river, at the road, at the village headman, at boys who walked too close to the ruined field. He accused travelers of trampling what remained, though most stepped carefully. Sarah let him rage until his voice grew hoarse. Then she handed him a bowl of rice and said, "Eat before you become less useful than the flood." Davy wanted sympathy. Not rice, but hunger accepted what pride refused. After eating, he walked the damage again. The road had become dangerous. Carts tilted near the ditch. Old women lifted their robes and crossed through slippery mud. Children avoided the place entirely, which meant taking a longer route through thorn grass. Davy saw all this and still thought first of his boundary. Suffering often narrows the eyes before it opens them. On the 4th day, a wandering monk appeared, carrying a staff with a brass ring near the top. He stopped where the road had collapsed and watched a man struggle to pull a cartwheel free. Without announcing himself, the monk set down his bowl, pushed from behind, and helped release the wheel. Davy noticed him because monks usually asked for alms before offering labor. This one worked quietly, then rinsed his feet in a puddle and sat on a stone that may once have belonged to Davy's boundary. That irritated the farmer enough to approach. He told the monk the stone was his. The monk stood at once and bowed to the stone, as if apologizing to it. "Then it has traveled without permission," he said. Davy did not laugh. The monk looked over the ruined road and field. Many things have traveled without permission this week. Something in the monk's tone prevented Davy from dismissing him. It held no mockery, only recognition. They walked along the washed-out edge while Davy explained the labor lost, the father's memory disturbed, the unfairness of water choosing his field. The monk listened with the patience of someone watching clouds cross a mountain. When Davy finished, the monk asked whether he intended to rebuild the boundary exactly where it had been. "Of course," Davy said. "Where else would it go?" The monk pointed to the road, where a grandmother was trying to guide a child around a deep rut. Perhaps some stones first belonged there? Davy stared at him. Giving boundary stones to the road felt like feeding his father's bones to strangers. He said so more harshly than he meant. The monk nodded. "Then your father must have been a man who built only for himself." The words struck like a slap, because they were untrue. Davy's father had repaired neighbors' roofs, lent oxen without recording debts, and once spent a winter making crutches for a boy whose leg had healed badly. Davy defended him at once. The monk listened until the defense became a memory. Davy saw his father laughing with other men while setting stones, inviting passing children to carry pebbles, telling Sarah during their first year of marriage that a good boundary kept peace not by saying mine loudly, but by helping everyone know where to walk. The monk said nothing more. He did not need to. Davi looked at the road again. Mud swallowed each footprint almost as soon as it was made. His field had lost order, but the road had lost safety. For the first time since the flood, he saw that his grief and the village's trouble were not separate streams. The next morning, Davi began moving stones to the road. He told himself he was only making a temporary crossing until officials came, though no official had cared for years. Sarah brought tea and watched without comment. A neighbor joined after breakfast. Then another after midday. By evening, 6 people were lifting stones from the silt, setting them into the worst ruts, packing mud around them, and laying branches for grip. Davi worked harder than anyone, partly from generosity, and partly because generosity still embarrassed him. When travelers thanked him, he muttered that the stones were in his way anyway. The monk, who had remained nearby, accepted this disguise of humility. He spent the day carrying small stones. Children could manage, making a game of choosing the ones shaped like turtles or sleeping cats. Laughter returned to the damaged place before beauty did. Repairing a road taught Davi things farming had hidden. A field rewards control. Plant straight, weed early. Water carefully. And the rows reveal your effort. A road belongs to footsteps you cannot predict. You repair it for people whose names you may never learn, for carts carrying goods you will never taste, for quarrelsome brothers, proud merchants, lazy boys, and widows with bundles too heavy for their backs. At first, Davi resented this openness. His stones, chosen by his father, were being worn by strangers. Then he noticed something strange. The more people crossed safely, the less the stones felt stolen. They seemed awake. A boundary stone, seen only by one family, had become part of many journeys. Each footstep did not erase his father. It carried the old man's labor farther than the field ever could. When the worst section of road was stable, Davi returned to his field. The old line could not be rebuilt exactly. The flood had carved a shallow curve near the edge, and if he forced the boundary straight, water would gather there again. The monk suggested leaving a small drainage path, a narrow channel where future rain could pass without tearing everything apart. Davi resisted because the channel took soil from him. Sarah, who had been quiet for days, finally said, "You can argue with water if you like, but it has more patience than you." The monk laughed so suddenly that even Davi smiled. They shaped the new boundary with a curve. It looked wrong at first, like a sentence written by a child. Over time, as stones settled and grass grew along the edges, the curve became graceful. Davi began to see that straightness had not been loyalty. It had only been habit. The following season was difficult. Millet grew unevenly where silt lay thick. Beans rotted in one low patch. Davi sometimes stood near the curved boundary and missed the old line with a physical ache. Grief does not disappear because wisdom has entered the room. It sits differently. On those days, the monk's teaching irritated him all over again. He would touch a stone in the road and think of how many remained missing from the wall. Yet each time someone crossed the repaired section safely, his resentment lost a little weight. A pregnant woman from the western village blessed him after passing without slipping. A boy rolled a hoop over the stones and shouted with triumph. An old peddler left a paper charm tucked into the boundary curve. Small moments gathered like rain in a jar. They did not replace what was lost, but they gave lost neighbors. One evening, Davi found the monk preparing to leave. The brass ring on his staff chimed softly as he tied his bundle. Davi felt an unexpected sadness. He had grown used to the old man's inconvenient clarity. He asked for one final teaching, hoping for something memorable enough to hold. The monk pointed to the road and then to the field. You have learned that a stone can guard a boundary or carry a traveler. Do not decide too early what anything is for. Davi wanted more, perhaps a blessing over the new curve or a promise that future floods would spare him. The monk offered neither. He bowed to Sarah, bowed to Davi, and walked toward the western hills. His figure grew small between the trees. The road did not become sacred because he walked on it. It became visibly sacred because Davi finally understood that every road had always held departures. Years brought other floods, though none as severe. The drainage channel worked better than Davi liked to admit. The road stones sank, shifted, and needed repair. Children who had carried turtle-shaped pebbles became adults with carts of their own. Davi's sons left for the city and returned less often than he wished. Each departure tested his practice. He wanted to build walls out of advice, guilt, and worry. Sarah would touch his arm and say, "Road or boundary?" That became their private reminder. Love could mark a home, but it also had to become a road. When their eldest son came back with a wife from another province and customs that seemed strange, Davi felt the old straight line rise in him. He breathed, remembered the curve, and made room at the table. The family changed shape. Not all change was easy. Some of it became beautiful only after pride stopped measuring the lost soil. In old age, Davi sat often beside the repaired road. His knees no longer allowed long hours in the field, and Sarah, whose hair had silvered before his, brought him tea in the afternoons. They watched travelers cross the stones his father had once helped place elsewhere. Many did not know the story. That no longer troubled him. A useful kindness did not need its name carved into it. One day a little girl asked why the boundary curved around a strip of grass. Davi told her water needed a place to pass. She asked why people did not simply tell water to behave. Sarah laughed until tea spilled on her sleeve. Davi considered the question carefully. Because water is older than our opinions, he said. The girl accepted this wisdom with great seriousness and hopped from stone to stone across the road, counting each jump as if counting blessings. Davi's understanding deepened during a drought, which seemed unfair after the flood had already taught him so much. The drainage channel lay dry, cracked at the bottom like an old bowl. Millet leaves curled inward. Dust rose from the road with every passing cart. Villagers who had thanked him for moving stones now argued over water turns at the shared well. Davi felt the old boundary self return, this time not around land, but around buckets. He counted how much his field needed, how much others wasted, how much resentment could be justified by a thirsty crop. Sarah watched him measure the jars 3 times one morning and said, "You are building a wall with numbers." He snapped that numbers kept people honest. She answered that fear also uses numbers when it wants to sound wise. Her words stung because he knew they were true before sunset. The drought revealed a second road, one made of water rather than stones. Davi and several neighbors dug a shallow shared channel from the old well runoff toward the lowest fields, taking turns guiding the flow with boards. No one received enough. Everyone received something. The work required listening, more difficult than lifting stones. A widow's vegetable patch needed less water, but fed 4 grandchildren. A wealthy farmer claimed extra because he had more land, though much of it grew crops for market rather than hunger. Arguments rose. Davi, remembering his own anger after the flood, tried to hear the fear beneath each demand. Sometimes he succeeded. Sometimes he wanted to strike someone with a shovel. The shared channel taught him that generosity is not a mood. It is a discipline practiced while the throat is dry. When rain finally returned, it came gently for 2 days, soaking without violence. Children ran through it shouting. Adults stood under eaves and pretended not to be moved. Davi walked to the curved boundary and watched water enter the drainage path, follow the line he had once resented, and pass harmlessly toward the ditch. The sight gave him a strange joy, almost private. He placed his hand on the wet stones and thanked his father aloud, not for making the first boundary, though that gratitude remained, but for raising a son stubborn enough to build and eventually tired enough to learn. Sarah joined him with 2 cups of hot tea. They stood in rain until their hair dripped. Some lessons, Davi thought, arrive first as damage, then as labor, then years later as a quiet path water can take. A dispute with his younger brother tested the lesson more painfully than weather. The brother returned after years away and claimed a strip of family land near the grove. By law, his claim was weak. By memory, it was complicated. He had left when their father was ill, and Davi had never forgiven the absence. The argument began over soil, but quickly became a trial of old wounds. For 2 nights, Davi slept badly, rehearsing speeches that would prove him right. On the 3rd morning, he walked the road stones before sunrise and heard cartwheels from a distance. Each stone carried weight without asking whether the foot deserved passage. By the time his brother arrived, Davi had not become saintly, but he had become less hungry to win. They spoke for hours. The final agreement gave the brother less land than he wanted, and more than Davi first allowed. Neither man felt victorious. That was why the agreement held. Afterward, Sarah asked whether he regretted yielding. Davi looked toward the grove, where his brother was already pruning branches with the restless energy of someone trying to belong again. Regret came and went. Relief stayed longer. He realized that some boundaries must remain clear, while others exist only because pain has not yet been heard. The art was not to erase every line. Without lines, fields become confusion. Without mercy, lines become prisons. The curved wall, the repaired road, the water channel, the shared grove, each had taught a different balance. That evening, Davi and his brother carried a basket of fallen branches to the house together. They did not speak of the past. Their shoulders brushed once at the doorway, and neither moved away too quickly. The old road eventually became known as Davi's Crossing. Though Davi objected whenever he heard the name, he said the stones had belonged first to his father, then to the flood, then to whoever stepped on them carefully. Names, however, grow where people need them. Travelers use the phrase, because it helped them locate the safe place. Children used it because it sounded like a story. Davi learned not to fight the name too much. Resistance can become another form of ownership. When someone praised him extravagantly, he pointed to the road and said it was still uneven. When someone complained, he handed them a tool. In this way, admiration and criticism both became invitations to work. The crossing improved slowly, not through a heroic day, but through seasons of small repairs. After carts, rain, hooves, and time had each taken their share. A monk from another monastery once asked Davi whether building the crossing had made him less attached. The question made him laugh so hard that Sarah came outside to see what had happened. Less attached? He still loved his field. He still worried over weather. He still disliked seeing careless boys kick stones loose for sport. The difference was not that attachment had vanished. It had become more transparent. He could see through it sooner. When anger rose, he asked what it was protecting. When fear tightened, he asked whether a boundary or a road was needed. Sometimes the answer was boundary. Some people had to be told no. Some animals had to be kept from seedlings. Some debts had to be named. Buddhism, he told the monk, had not made him into mist. It had made him a better farmer of solid things. After Sarah died, Davi nearly closed himself again. Grief made every shared object dangerous. Her cup, her shawl, the mint patch she had defended against his hoe. For several weeks he avoided the road because travelers still expected greetings, and he had none to give. One afternoon, he found a bundle of fresh mint tied to his door. No note. The next day, there was soup. The day after that, a repaired sandal. The road he had helped restore began returning people to him, one quiet kindness at a time. He did not feel grateful immediately. Pain has its own weather, but when he finally walked to the crossing, villagers did not crowd him. They nodded and kept working. Their restraint was a bridge too. Davi stood on the stones and understood that giving the road back had ensured he would not have to cross grief alone. Davi's grandchildren loved the crossing because adults told them to be careful there. Children are drawn to any place surrounded by warnings. They invented games around the stones, gave names to the largest ones, and argued over which had once belonged to the original wall. Davi let them invent. Their stories were wrong in detail and true in spirit. A stone that had served a boundary, a flood, a road, a child, and an old man's memory could survive a few wild names. Watching them play, he understood that legacy is rarely what a person plans. You build a wall to protect a field, and one day children use it as a map for laughter. In quiet weather, Davi sometimes walked the road at dusk with no tool in his hand. This was new. For most of his life, he had approached every place as something needing work. The crossing taught him to receive as well as repair. Dust settled gold in the low sun. Frogs called from the drainage channel after rain. Sarah's mint grew thick beside the curve, returning each year without permission. Davi would sit on a boundary stone and feel how the day ended without asking him to finish it. Rest, he learned, was also a road given back. On the night Davi died, rain fell gently, not like the flood that had changed his life, but like a hand smoothing cloth. He had asked to rest near the window where he could hear the road. Sarah sat beside him, holding the same hand that had built, resisted, repaired, and finally released. A cart passed late, wheels clicking over the stone crossing. Davy opened his eyes and smiled. He whispered that his father was still working. Sarah understood. The boundary, the road, the lost straight line, the curved channel, the footsteps of strangers, all of it had become one field. Near midnight his breathing slowed. Rain moved through the drainage path exactly as it was meant to, not asking permission, not causing harm. In the morning, villagers found the road clear, the field drinking quietly, and the stones holding both memory and passage, without needing to choose between them. Story 4. The Child Who Counted the Bells. At the northern edge of a misty valley stood Bell Cloud Monastery, named not because its bells were many, but because fog often gathered around the bell tower until the sound seemed to come from the sky itself. The youngest novice there was a boy called Toma. He had arrived after his grandmother died, carrying a bundle of clothes, a cracked wooden comb, and an anxious habit of counting everything. He counted steps from the dormitory to the kitchen, bowls on the breakfast shelf, birds on the roof beam, breaths between thunder and rain. Numbers comforted him because they made the world appear less likely to vanish without warning. His grandmother had died between one morning and the next, and no one had given him a number large enough to explain it. At Bell Cloud, the day was shaped by bells: waking bell, work bell, meal bell, evening bell. Toma loved and feared them. Each sound told him what came next, but each fading reminded him that nothing stayed. The abbot, an old woman named Shun, noticed his counting during the first week. She said nothing at first. Good teachers often watch before teaching, because a person's habit is a door that opens only from the inside. Toma worked hard. He scrubbed floors until his knuckles reddened, memorized chants quickly, and bowed lower than required. The other novices liked him, but found him exhausting. If a chant began late, he whispered the missed count under his breath. If a soup ladle touched the pot 3 times instead of 2, his shoulders tightened. At night, when the valley darkened and the monastery settled, he lay awake, counting heartbeats. Sleep frightened him, because it was the one place numbers dissolved. Dreams refused order. Grief entered dreams, wearing his grandmother's shawl, and he woke with wet cheeks, angry that he had lost count again. One winter afternoon, Abbot Shun asked Toma to help in the bell tower. Snow had begun to fall in small, dry flakes, and the stairs were cold enough to make their feet ache through sandals. The great bell hung from black beams, polished by decades of smoke and hands. It was not beautiful in an obvious way. Its rim was chipped, and green weather stains marked one side. Toma bowed to it with unusual seriousness. The abbot handed him a cloth and told him to wipe the lower rim. He began at once, moving carefully from mark to mark. After a while, she asked how many times the bell rang each day. Toma answered immediately. 4 main bells, 12 small signals, 36 practice strikes on teaching days, fewer during retreat, more during storms if travelers needed guidance. Shun nodded as though he had recited a poem. Then she asked, "How many sounds does one bell make?" Toma almost smiled because the answer seemed too easy. One strike made one sound. Before he could speak, the abbot lifted the wooden striker and touched it gently to the bell. A low tone opened through the tower. It was not loud, yet it seemed to move through the wood, the snow, Toma's ribs, and the valley below. The first sound was round and deep. Then came a softer trembling. Then a thin, bright edge, almost hidden inside the fading. The tone changed while remaining itself. Toma listened, despite himself. By the time silence returned, his prepared answer felt foolish. Shun rested the striker against the beam. "If you count too quickly," she said, "you hear only the beginning. Most of the bell lives after the strike." Toma looked at the bronze rim. He had counted bells for months and had hardly listened to one. The lesson unsettled him. That evening, during chanting, he heard endings everywhere. The last syllable of a verse did not disappear immediately. It thinned into the rafters. A spoon set down after supper left a tiny ring in the bowl. Footsteps in the corridor softened before vanishing. Even silence had textures he had never noticed, because he had been busy numbering the next thing. Toma did not enjoy this at first. Listening made the world larger and less controllable. Counting had drawn sharp lines around experience. Listening blurred them. He missed the comfort of declaring a thing finished. When he complained to an older novice, the boy shrugged and said the abbot had once made him listen to a cabbage being chopped. Bell Cloud was full of strange assignments. Toma laughed, but the laugh turned into a yawn. That night, he slept for 3 hours without counting heartbeats, and woke surprised, as if sleep had borrowed him and returned him safely. Spring came late to the valley. Snow withdrew from the roofs, then from the shaded stones, then from the path to the lower village. With spring came visitors, including families who climbed to the monastery for blessings before planting season. Toma disliked visitor days because they disrupted the schedule. Babies cried during chants. Farmers asked questions during sweeping. Children touched the bell ropes and had to be gently pulled away. One morning, a girl about 6 years old stood below the tower, staring up with the solemnity children reserve for large animals and sacred objects. She asked Toma whether the bell was lonely when no one rang it. He answered that bells did not feel loneliness. The girl considered this and said, "Maybe they do, but slower." Toma had no rule for that kind of sentence. He told her not to touch the rope. She obeyed, then asked whether he was lonely slower too. The question followed him around all day. He wanted to dismiss it as childish, but children often strike bells adults have hidden. Was he lonely? He had been too busy counting to ask. After his grandmother's death, people had comforted him with phrases about time healing and the monastery becoming a family. He had nodded because adults seemed relieved when children accepted comfort quickly. Beneath his obedience, loneliness had not left. It had slowed down and settled into routines. It lived in the way he folded his blanket with excessive care, in how he kept the cracked comb though he had no use for it, in his anger when bells faded. That evening he took the comb from his bundle and placed it on the floor before him. One tooth was missing. He touched the gap and remembered his grandmother pulling it through her silver hair, wincing at tangles, humming off-key. For once, he did not count the memories. He let them arrive unevenly. Abbot Shun found him still awake when the moon had crossed half the window. She did not ask why the cone lay between them. She lowered herself to the floor with the care of old knees and waited. Toma said he could remember his grandmother's hands, but not the exact sound of her voice. This felt like a betrayal. Shun picked up the comb and turned it over. When a bell fades, do you say it has betrayed the strike? Toma shook his head. The fading is part of the sound, she said. He wanted to believe her, but grief was not as obedient as doctrine. He asked what to do when memory became thin. The abbot placed the comb back in his palm. Hold what comes. Do not punish what has gone. Love is not proven by perfect remembering. The words did not fix the ache. They gave it permission to breathe. From then on, Toma's practice changed. He still counted sometimes, especially on difficult mornings, but he began adding listening to the count. 10 steps to the kitchen became 10 chances to feel the floor. 4 bells became 4 invitations to hear what followed. When anxiety rose, he named it softly, rather than building a cage of numbers around it. The older novices noticed he interrupted less. The cook noticed he stopped correcting the ladle. A sparrow built a nest under the eaves near the dormitory, and Toma watched it carry straw without making a record of how many trips it took. Some days he failed completely. During a festival, when guests arrived in unexpected numbers and the meal bell rang late, panic climbed his throat. He snapped at a child for laughing near the shrine. Shame came quickly afterward. He bowed to the child, apologized, and listened to the shame without letting it become his whole name. One night in summer, a storm broke over the valley with such force that the monastery lamps shook. Rain hammered the tiles. Wind pushed mist through cracks in the tower walls. Near midnight, villagers began striking a wooden board at the lower gate, the signal for help. A bridge had flooded, and 2 travelers were missing on the path. The monks gathered lanterns and ropes. Abbot Shun told Toma to remain in the bell tower and ring the great bell every few minutes so the searchers could find their direction in the storm. His stomach tightened. This was a count he could not fail. Too soon, and the sound might confuse them. Too late, and someone might wander farther from safety. Shun saw fear on his face. She put both hands on his shoulders. "Do not count for control tonight," she said. "Listen for need." Then she left him with the bell and the dark. The first strike shook him. The bell's tone rolled into rain and vanished sooner than usual, swallowed by weather. Toma gripped the striker and began counting breaths. At 30, he panicked and wondered if 30 was too few. At 60, he imagined a traveler falling. At 90, he saw his grandmother's empty bed. The old habit returned fiercely. Measure, prevent, secure the world. His hands trembled. Then he remembered the abbot's words, "Listen for need." He lowered the striker and opened his attention. Rain on tiles, wind through cedar branches, distant voices near the lower path, water roaring below the bridge. Beneath all of it, The valley seemed to lean toward the tower, waiting. He struck again. This time he listened to the bell after the strike, following its body through the storm until it thinned. When it disappeared, he did not rush. He waited until the darkness felt directionless again, then rang once more. The search lasted until the hour before dawn. Toma's arms ached. His robe clung wetly to his skin. He rang the bell many times, but later he could not say how many. This would once have frightened him. Instead, it felt honest. He had not abandoned discipline. He had entered a deeper one. Near morning, voices rose from the path. The missing travelers had heard the bell and followed its fading from ridge to gate. One had injured an ankle, but both were alive. When the monks returned, soaked and shivering, Toma descended the tower steps, carrying the striker like a sleeping child. The travelers bowed to him. He wanted to say the abbot had told him what to do, that the bell had done the work, that anyone could have stood there. All of that was true. He bowed back and said only, "I am glad you heard it." After the storm, Bell Cloud changed in Toma's mind. The monastery was no longer a set of rules protecting him from loss. It was a place where sounds were made for others and then released. The waking bell did not drag the sun into the sky. It helped sleepy bodies meet morning. The meal bell did not create hunger. It gathered hunger into community. The evening bell did not end the day by force. It reminded the valley that endings could be entered gently. Toma began to understand why Abbot Shun never hurried after a bell. She listened to the fading because fading was not failure. It was the sound giving itself away. This became his way of remembering his grandmother too. When her voice would not come clearly, he did not panic. He noticed what remained: the feel of the comb, the habit of folding cloth carefully, the way she had taught him to warm bowls before serving soup. Love had echoes beyond sound. Years later, Toma became bellkeeper. He was still young compared to the senior monks, but no one understood the tower as he did. He oiled the beam, checked the rope, cleared nests only after birds had left, and taught new novices how to strike without violence. One boy arrived with a habit of asking questions so quickly that answers had no place to land. Toma recognized the hunger beneath the speed. On the boy's third day, he took him to the tower and asked how many sounds one bell made. The boy answered immediately, 1. Toma smiled, not because the answer was wrong, but because he had loved it once. He struck the bell gently. The tone opened, deepened, trembled, thinned. The boy's eyes widened. Outside, fog moved across the valley in slow white layers. Toma did not explain. He let the bell finish teaching its first lesson. In his later life, when Abbot Shun had passed and the cracked comb had finally broken beyond keeping, Toma sometimes sat alone in the tower after the evening bell. He no longer feared the space after sound. The valley at dusk was full of things ending without tragedy: smoke dissolving above kitchen roofs, birds folding into trees, day withdrawing from stones, thoughts losing their sharp edges. Visitors occasionally asked how to quiet the mind before sleep. Toma never gave them complicated methods. He told them to listen to one sound until it changed, then listen to the change without chasing it. A breath, a cricket, rain, a distant dog, the hum of their own blood in the air. Let the sound leave at its own pace, he would say. The mind learns rest by watching something depart without following it. Many found this too simple. Those who tried it often returned with softer faces. On the last winter night of his life, Toma asked to be carried to the bell tower. Snow was falling, and the monks worried about the cold, but he insisted with a gentleness that left no room for argument. They wrapped him in blankets and set him near the great bell. It was the same bell, still chipped, still weather-stained, still capable of filling the valley. Toma placed one thin hand on the bronze and felt no need to count the years. A young novice held the striker for him. Toma nodded. The boy struck the bell once. Sound moved through the tower, through snow, through the bodies of everyone present. Toma listened to the beginning, the trembling, the hidden brightness, the fading. He thought of his grandmother, not as a face he had failed to preserve, but as warmth that had taught him how to receive the world. Before the tone vanished completely, he smiled. Silence came the rest of the way like a trusted friend. The cracked comb became a teaching object in ways Toma never planned. A novice named Jiro found it one afternoon while helping clean the dormitory shelves and asked why anyone would keep something broken. Toma almost answered with a story about his grandmother, but the boy's question carried more curiosity than judgment, so he handed him the comb instead. Jiro ran a finger along the missing tooth. "It still looks like a comb," he said. Toma nodded. "And it still remembers being used." The boy laughed because objects do not remember, then grew quiet because the sentence had entered somewhere deeper than logic. Toma told him that people often throw away broken things too quickly because they fear seeing themselves. A missing tooth, a scar, a faded voice in memory. None of these means love has failed. They only mean life has touched what it was given. In the 10th year of Toma's bell keeping, an official from the capital visited Bell Cloud and suggested replacing the old bell. He spoke kindly, even respectfully, but his eyes measured cracks, stains, and uneven resonance. The capital could donate a new bell, he said, one tuned to a purer tone and cast with an inscription honoring the monastery. Some monks were tempted. A clear tone would carry farther in fog. A new bell might draw patrons. Toma listened without anger, though his hand rested on the old bronze, as if feeling a pulse. Abbot Shun was gone by then, and the decision belonged to the council. They debated for 3 evenings. Toma said little until asked directly. Then he struck the old bell once and waited through its whole fading. "This bell has learned the valley," he said. "Before we ask for a purer sound, let us ask whether we have listened to the one already serving us." The new bell was never ordered. The official, to his credit, did not take offense. He stayed an extra night and asked Toma to explain what it meant for a bell to learn a valley. Toma answered by taking him outside before dawn. Fog filled the lower fields. The world seemed made of gray wool. Toma rang the bell softly. The sound did not travel in a straight line. It touched the tower beams, moved down the slope, disappeared briefly behind the cedar grove, returned from the cliff face, and settled near the village roofs. Dogs barked, then stopped. A child cried once, then quieted. The official stood very still. "City bells," he admitted. were struck to announce power, danger, ceremony, or time. This bell seemed to announce relationship. Toma liked that word. Relationship had no clean edge. It was exactly the kind of thing counting could begin but never finish. Illness came to the monastery one humid summer. It was not a great plague, but a fever that moved from body to body, leaving weakness behind. The bells were rung less often so the sick could sleep. Toma found this strangely difficult. Bells had once frightened him. Now, their absence did. Without the usual sounds, the day spread out shapelessly. He remembered being a child afraid of sleep and felt compassion for that small, counting self. While caring for the sick, he learned another kind of listening to breath, to the difference between rest and distress, to the needs people were too tired to voice. A young monk apologized repeatedly for being helpless. Toma wiped his face with cool cloths and said helplessness was not a moral failure. The words surprised him. Perhaps he had needed to hear them from his own mouth. When the fever passed, the first full evening bell brought nearly everyone to tears, not because it was grand, but because it was ordinary. Ordinary things become luminous after we nearly lose them. The kitchen smoke, the scrape of sandals, someone complaining that the rice was too soft. Toma stood in the tower and let the sound move. He did not try to make it especially beautiful. He had learned that over-effort enters a bell as tension. The cleanest tone comes from a body balanced between care and release. Afterward, the monks sat together without chanting. Crickets took over the teaching. Toma realized that the monastery had not been held together by schedules alone. It had been held by countless acts of attention, most of them too small to record. A damp cloth on a forehead, a bowl left within reach, a bell withheld so another could sleep. The lesson of the bell entered Toma's dreams. He often dreamed not of ringing it, but of standing inside the bronze body while sound moved around him like warm wind. In those dreams, he saw numbers painted on the air, then watched them loosen into birds. He told no one at first, because monks can be strangely proud about not seeming strange. Eventually, he mentioned it to Abbot Shun during tea. She listened, then asked whether the birds flew away or returned. Toma said they did both. The abbot poured more tea and said the dream was wiser than many books. A number that cannot fly becomes a cage. A bird that never returns becomes confusion. Practice, she told him, was learning when to count the breath and when to let the breath count itself. A mother from the lower village brought her restless son to the monastery one evening and asked Toma to teach him sleep. The request almost made him smile. Sleep was not a craft like mending sandals. The boy was thin, sharp-eyed, and determined not to be impressed. Toma took him to the tower and did not speak for a while. When the child grew impatient, Toma asked him to listen for the smallest sound in the valley. The boy named the stream. Then the crickets. Then a cart far away. Finally, he heard his own sleeve brushing the floor. When he moved, his face changed. The world had become wider without becoming louder. Toma struck the bell once and told him to follow the sound until it was gone. The boy fell asleep before it finished fading. His mother wept quietly, less from surprise than from relief. In time, people brought Toma many questions. How to stop missing the dead, how to forgive a brother, how to pray when belief felt thin, how to sleep when the mind kept relighting old fires. He never pretended to solve what could not be solved in one meeting. He asked what they heard at night. Some heard regret, some heard fear, some heard a name. He would guide them toward a real sound nearby, not to escape the inner one, but to keep it company. Rain and grief could be heard together. Breath and longing could share a room. A bell and a fading memory could both be allowed to change. This was his clearest teaching. The mind becomes cruel when it demands one sound only. Peace begins when many sounds are permitted to exist without fighting for the whole sky. The little boy who had fallen asleep under the bell returned as a young man many years later. He was carrying a bundle and the exhausted look of someone who had tried to outrun his own mind. Toma recognized him only when he mentioned the night he slept. Before the bell faded, they walked together near the tower. The young man confessed that peace had not stayed with him. Toma said peace was not a guest who agrees to be imprisoned. It visits where conditions are kind. Together they listened to the evening insects. The young man smiled faintly. Nothing dramatic happened. He simply remembered that rest begins closer than the mind insists. Before sleep each night, Toma developed a practice he shared with anyone who asked. Choose one sound that is already present. Do not improve it. Do not name it too many times. Let it change. Let it fade. When another sound appears, receive that one also. If thoughts speak, include them without handing them the whole room. This practice was so plain that some dismissed it. Others discovered, after years of complicated effort, that plain doors are often the ones left unlocked. Toma liked that. The deepest teachings did not need to shine. They only needed to open. One final teaching came from a night with no bell at all. Heavy snow packed the tower door shut, and by the time the monks cleared it, the usual hour had passed. The valley remained strangely calm. No villagers came running. No disaster unfolded. People slept, dreamed, woke, and found morning without the sound they had expected. Toma smiled at the humility of it. Even a beloved bell was not the source of peace. It was a reminder, a finger pointing toward a quiet that had never belonged to bronze. That realization freed him from becoming proud of his own tenderness. The work was important, but the world was not held together by his hand. When he told the novices this, one asked why they should ring the bell at all. Toma answered, because reminders are merciful, because beings forget, because a small sound offered without ownership can help a tired heart remember the way home. And when no sound comes, the way home is still present. It waits in the next breath, in the warmth beneath the blanket, in the courage to let the unfinished day remain unfinished until morning. Toma always said that sleep does not require every answer, only enough trust to stop standing guard at the door of the mind. Even a restless heart can lie down when it finally understands that the night is not an exam, and peace can arrive quietly, without permission or performance. Long after Toma's passing, Travelers still spoke of Bell Cloud's evening bell. Some said it made grief easier. Others said it helped children sleep. A few claimed that in thick fog, the bells seemed to ring from inside their own chest. The monks did not encourage legends, but they did not argue either. At night, when the valley darkened and the monastery prepared for rest, the bell keeper would climb the tower steps, lift the striker, and pause long enough to listen before sound began. Below, people settled onto mats. Lamps were covered, bowls dried on shelves. Worries from the day remained, but they loosened slightly, as knots loosen when fingers stop pulling. Then the bell sounded. No one could keep it. No one needed to. It entered the valley, gave itself to every listening life, and faded into the same quiet from which all rest is born.